Unmarriageable. My cousin Petra said it the way one flicks a crumb from a sleeve, not even lowering her voice, and the whole of Stormville's great hall heard it settle over me like frost. I did not flinch. I had learned, in 19 years of being the Omega no one wanted seated near the fire, that flinching only fed them. So I kept my spine straight in my patched gray wool, my hands folded before me, and I let the laughter ripple past without giving it my face. No dowry, no pack standing, no house behind her. Petra went on to the cluster of well-fed nobles around her, though she meant it for the length of the hall to hear. Someone really ought to tell her to stop attending these gatherings at all. She only reminds everyone what happens to a bloodline that forgets its own worth. Candlelight dripped gold down the banners of Stormville from the high rafters, and 300 guests in silk and fastened jewels went quiet in that particular way. A crowd goes quiet when it has decided cruelty is entertainment enough to watch rather than stop. No one spoke for me. No one ever did. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the King of Stormville walked in, and everything Petra had just built collapsed without a single word from me. I did not know in that first heartbeat that it was him. I only knew that a tall man in a dark gray coat had entered mid-stride, still speaking low to the steward beside him, and that the moment his eyes lifted and crossed the width of that hall, they found mine and would not let go. Something happened in my chest that I have no name for even now, not a flutter, not a pull. It was as if a second heartbeat woke up inside my ribs, one that had been sleeping there my whole life without my knowing, and it began to beat in time with his from across the room, so loud I thought the nearest guests must hear it too. He stopped walking. The steward beside him kept going 2 full steps before realizing he'd lost his king and turned back, confused. Cassian did not look confused. He looked like a man who had just found the one fixed point in a room that had always tilted, and the finding of it had gone straight through him. The hall, which had been laughing at me a breath before, went silent instead, the particular silence of people trying to work out what they had just witnessed and finding no safe place to put their faces. I should say now who he was, though every soul in that hall already knew. Cassian, King of Stormville, the alpha who had held that throne alone for 6 years since his father's death, who had turned away every offered bride his council paraded before him with the same courteous, immovable refusal, until the older lords had stopped trying and simply waited, the way one waits out a long winter. He was not looking at any of them now. He was looking at me, standing in my patched wool at the unfashionable end of the hall, where the poor relations and the unmarried and the forgotten were customarily arranged, so as not to trouble the eye of anyone important. Petra's mouth was still open on the tail end of her sentence. She closed it slowly, as though only now hearing the echo of her own words bouncing back at her from the king's stillness. Cassian crossed the floor. He did not stride like a man making an entrance. He walked the way water finds the lowest point in a field, direct, unhurried, as if the whole hall had simply tilted toward me and he was only obeying the slope of it. Silk skirts rustled aside. A goblet stopped halfway to someone's lips. I heard my own pulse in my ears louder than the fire in the hearth. He stopped before me and did not bow, though a king bows to no one. Instead he did something stranger. He inclined his head to me the way a man inclines his head to someone he has been searching for without knowing her name, and then he held out his hand, palm up, open, asking rather than taking. "Forgive me," he said, low enough that it was almost only for me, though the whole hall strained to hear it. "I am told I have interrupted something. I find I am not sorry." I looked at his hand. I had spent my whole life being told what I was not favored, not dowered, not wanted, and here was a hand held out with nothing demanded of it, waiting for me to decide. I set mine into it. The moment our palms met, the sleeping second heartbeat in my chest surged up into something closer to song, and beneath the worn cuff of my sleeve I felt a warmth bloom against my wrist, faint as a coal catching. I did not need to look down to know something had changed there. I looked at his face instead, and found him already watching my wrist too, something fierce and unguardedly glad breaking across his features. "You feel it," he said, "not a question." "I don't know what it is," I admitted, because I had never learned how to lie prettily, only how to survive plainly, and those are different skills. "It is a bond," he said. "Mine has been waiting for you since before I knew to wait." He said it simply, the way a man states weather, or distance, or fact, no flourish in it, only certainty. "I have turned away every woman my counsel has set before me for 6 years, because none of them made my hand ache to hold this way. I did not know why until this moment." Behind him, I heard Petra's chair scrape back as she rose, perhaps to object, perhaps only to flee the sudden attention now swinging toward our end of the hall like a compass needle finding north. She did neither. She stood frozen, her wine-red mouth pressed into a thin line, and said nothing at all, the first silence I had ever known her to choose. "Your Majesty," the steward said carefully, arriving at last, "the Lady Odessa is under my protection from this hour," Cashin said, without turning his head from me, "and will be addressed as such." A murmur went through the hall like wind through wheat, 300 voices deciding all at once how to feel about what they had just seen, and none of them brave enough to feel it first. I should have been afraid. A king does not simply choose a penniless Omega from the shadowed end of a hall and rewrite her whole life with one sentence. But the warmth at my wrist had not faded, and his hand had not let go of mine, and when I looked up into his face, I did not find command there. I found a man holding something he was terrified of gripping too hard, terrified of frightening away. "You need not decide anything tonight," he said, quieter now, only for me. "I know what I felt when I crossed this floor. I do not yet know what you feel, standing where you stand, and I will not mistake my certainty for yours, but I would very much like the chance to earn it." No one had ever asked me that. Not once in 19 years had anyone paused to wonder whether I might have a preference worth waiting for. "I feel," I said carefully, testing the words as I spoke them, "as though something has been standing very still inside me for a long time, and has just been told it may finally move." Something eased in his shoulders at that, some tension I had not noticed until it left him. "Then we will let it move slowly," he said. "Slowly enough that you never once feel chased." He turned then, at last, to face the hall, to face Petra, who had not moved, and the ring of nobles around her who had laughed a quarter-hour before, and now stood like men caught out in a storm without their coats. "I understand my arrival was preceded by some commentary," Cashin said, and though his voice did not rise, it filled the hall the way cold fills a room when a door is left open. "On the subject of worth, of dowries and houses and standing." He did not point at Petra. He did not need to. "I would remind this hall that I am the son of a king who taught me worth is not inherited through blood or coin, but recognized. And that recognition, when it comes, does not consult a guest list first." Petra's face had gone the color of the tallow candles guttering above her. She opened her mouth once, found nothing in it, and closed it again. "I will not humiliate anyone further tonight," Cashin went on, and there was something almost gentle beneath the iron of it. "I think the hall has humiliated itself sufficiently on its own account. Let it simply be remembered going forward, what was said here, and what was true." He did not wait for an answer. He turned back to me, and the iron went out of his voice entirely, replaced by something so soft I almost did not recognize it as belonging to the same man. "Will you sit with me?" he asked, not as a spectacle, only as two people who have just discovered something neither of us expected to find tonight. I thought of every gathering I had attended in that hall over the years, seated at the far table where the candle wax dripped fastest and the fire's warmth never quite reached. I thought of how many times I had told myself I did not mind it, because minding it changed nothing. "I would like that," I said, "though I warn you, I have very little practice being looked at kindly." You may have to be patient while I learn what to do with it." "I have 6 years of patience stored up," he said, the corner of his mouth finally allowing itself to lift. "I find I am glad to have somewhere to spend it." He led me not to the high table, where the council sat stiff and startled, but to a smaller table near the hearth, half turned from the room's stairs, and pulled the chair back himself before any steward could reach it. It was such a small thing, a chair pulled back by a king's own hand, and yet I felt it land somewhere deep, some old bruised place that had never once been offered such plain courtesy. "They will talk of nothing else for a month," I said, glancing at the hall, where conversation had resumed in the over-loud, careful way of people pretending they had not just watched history rearrange itself in front of them. "Let them," Cashin said, seating himself across from me rather than beside me, close enough to speak softly, far enough that I did not feel crowded. "I have given this hall 6 years of refusing every bride they offered. I think I have earned one evening of doing exactly as I please." "And what pleases you?" I asked, and surprised myself with the boldness of it. "Watching you decide moment by moment that you are allowed to stop bracing," he said. "You have not once, since I crossed that floor, fully unclenched your hands. I would like to see that happen." "I am in no hurry." I looked down and found he was right, my knuckles pale, my fingers curled tight around themselves out of old habit, the same habit that had carried me through every gathering where I stood at the edge waiting to be dismissed. Slowly, deliberately, I opened them. "There," I said, "a start." "A fine one," he said, and something in his voice made the warmth at my wrist flare gently again, as though the bond itself approved. We spoke for a long while after that, not of thrones or dowries or the 6 years of refused brides, but of smaller things. He asked where I had learned the careful, even stitching on my sleeve, and I told him my mother had taught me before she died, and that I had kept mending the same 3 dresses for years because there had never been coin for new ones. He did not wince at that the way the nobles always had, distaste thinly veiled as pity. He only nodded, as if information about me mattered simply for being about me, not for what it revealed about my usefulness to anyone. I asked him in turn what a king does with an evening when he is not refusing brides, and he laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and admitted that mostly he had spent those evenings alone in his study reading reports about grain stores, because it was easier than sitting through another dinner where every woman at the table had been coached on what to say to please him. "And did I please you?" I asked, half in jest, before I could stop myself. "You did not try to," he said. "That is precisely why you did." The hour grew late. Candles burned low in their sconces, guttering gold going amber, and the crowd thinned by careful degrees, though I noticed none of them left before finding some pretext to glance our way once more, still hardly believing what their own eyes had shown them. Petra did not approach again that night. I saw her once, near the door, speaking low and fast to one of the older lords, her hands moving in the particular agitated way of someone rehearsing an excuse she has not yet found convincing even to herself. I felt no triumph watching her, only a kind of quiet settling, the way a scale finally rests level after years of being pressed down on one side. "You are not going to gloat," Cashin observed, following my gaze. "There is nothing to gloat over," I said. "She said what she believed. I would rather she simply believed something else going forward. Gloating will not teach her that. Time might." He studied me for a long moment, something unreadable and warm moving behind his eyes. "My father used to say a Luna is known not by how she treats those who favor her, but by how she treats those who never did. I did not understand it until tonight." The word Luna sat strange and enormous in the air between us, and I felt my breath catch on it. "You go quickly," I said, though not unkindly. "I said the word, I did not ask the question," he said. "Not yet, I told you slowly, I meant it. Tonight I only ask if you will let me walk you home, since I understand you came without escort, and I find I do not like the thought of you crossing the dark alone after everything this hall has put you through." "I have crossed that dark alone every night of my life," I said, "but I find tonight I would rather not." He rose and offered his arm rather than his hand this time, an old-fashioned courtesy that made something in me ache with how long it had been since anyone had offered me anything old-fashioned or courteous at all. I took it. We walked out through the great doors together, past the last knots of guests who fell quiet as we passed, and then erupted into whispers the instant they judged us out of hearing, though we were not nearly so far as they believed. Cashin did not seem to hear them, or did not care to. His attention stayed on the uneven cobbles beneath my worn shoes, adjusting his pace so I would never need to hurry to match him. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars hard and close over Stormville's rooftops, and my breath came in pale clouds. The warmth at my wrist had settled into something steady now, no longer a startled flare but a quiet, constant pulse, like a second heartbeat finally at rest beside my own. "Might I ask you something?" I said, as we turned onto the lane that led toward the poorer quarter where I kept 2 rented rooms above a chandler's shop. "Anything. Why did you stop walking in the hall before you even knew whose eyes you'd found?" He considered this seriously, as though it deserved a true answer rather than a practiced one. "I have stood in that hall 100 times," he said. "I have looked out over it 100 times at every face turned toward me, hoping to be noticed. You were the only one not looking at me at all. You were looking at your own hands, waiting to be dismissed. And I thought, that is a woman who has never once been looked at the way she deserves. I would like to be the first." I had no answer ready for that. I only walked beside him in silence for a while, the cobbles ringing faint under our steps, until we reached the narrow stair beside the chandler's shuttered window. "This is where I live," I said, feeling suddenly and foolishly embarrassed by the smallness of it, the peeling paint, the crooked sign above the door. "Then I am glad to know where to find you," he said, "though I hope in time you will let me offer somewhere warmer." "In time," I agreed, "not tonight." He did not press. He lifted my hand instead, the one with the mark still glowing faint gold beneath my sleeve, and pressed his lips to my knuckles, brief and reverent, the way one might touch something rare and refuse to presume further. "Sleep well, Odessa," he said. "Tomorrow I will come properly in daylight, so the whole city can watch me court you honestly, instead of only the hall that already saw the start of it." "You mean to make a show of this?" "I mean to make certain no one in Stormville ever again mistakes your worth for something owed to a dowry," he said. "That is not a show. That is simply the truth, said loudly enough that even the deaf may hear it." He waited at the foot of the stair until I had let myself in and lit the single candle by my window, and only then, glancing down through the glass, did I see him finally turn and walk back toward the palace, his shadow long and steady under the lamplight. And something in my chest, that new, waking second heartbeat, settled into a rhythm I understood. At last, I would carry for the rest of my life. He came the next morning, as he had promised. I heard him before I saw him, the unmistakable hush that fell over the street below my window, neighbors pausing mid-errand, a cart driver forgetting to finish scolding his horse. And when I leaned out, I found the King of Stormville standing in the mud lane before the chandler's shop as though it were the most natural place in the world for him to be, dressed plainly, without guards, without banners, holding a small paper parcel of early plums. "I did not know what you liked," he said when I came down, "so I bought what looked ripest and hoped you would forgive my ignorance." "You could have sent a servant for this." "I could have," he agreed. "I did not want to." We walked the market lane together that morning, and it was nothing like the hall the night before. No candlelight, no silk, only the ordinary business of Stormville waking around us, fishmongers calling their prices, a baker's boy weaving between us with a tray balanced on one palm. And yet the same hush followed us everywhere, heads turning, whispers trailing, because word had already outrun us. The king had crossed his own great hall for the Omega everyone had agreed was worth nothing. Not everyone had made peace with it, as quickly as the crowd's silence the night before suggested. 3 days later, the council summoned him, and, unusually, summoned me as well, a courtesy I understood immediately to be no courtesy at all, but a testing. The council chamber was smaller than the great hall but colder somehow, all gray stone and old banners, and the 5 lords who governed Stormville's provinces sat along a table shaped like a crescent moon, with Cassion's empty throne chair at its center point, though he chose, when we entered, to stand beside me rather than take it. "Your Majesty," said Lord Barrick, eldest of the 5, a man with a beard the color of ash and eyes that missed nothing, "we do not question your right to choose. We question the wisdom of choosing so publicly, so suddenly, a woman with no house behind her to answer for her." "I am not aware that a house has ever been required to answer for character," Cassion said, "only for coin. I find I have coin enough for 2. "Wit will not calm the border lords who expected an alliance marriage," said another, Lady Cecily, younger, sharper, though not unkind in her sharpness. 3 houses have daughters they believed were under consideration. You risk offending all 3 in a single evening." "Then I will offend all 3, Cassion said, "rather than spend my life waking beside a woman I do not ache to look at." I stood through this exchange with my hands folded, the old habit returning despite myself, and felt every eye in that chamber measuring me, the way one measures cloth for flaws before purchase. I understood, standing there, that I would have to speak for myself if I meant to be more to this council than a complication to be managed around. "My lords," I said, and the chamber's attention swung to me so sharply I felt it like a physical weight. I did not ask to be chosen. I did not campaign for this, nor scheme for it, nor even hope for it, because hoping for what is plainly impossible only teaches a person cruelty toward herself. I do not know yet what I will become in this position. But I know what I have been for 19 years, patient, honest, and unwilling to pretend a kindness I do not feel or a grievance I am not owed. If that is insufficient qualification for your comfort, I understand. But I did not come here asking for your comfort. I came because your king asked me to stand beside him, and I judged that worth more than your approval." Silence again, a different silence than the halls, this one considering rather than merely stunned. Lord Barrick's mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close to the shadow of one. "Well," he said, "at least she does not flatter." "She has had little practice at it," Cassion said. "I find I prefer her without." The council did not bless the match that day. I do not think councils bless anything so quickly, being built from caution the way a wall is built from stone, but neither did they forbid it, and I understood, walking out beside Cassion into the gray afternoon, that this was as close to victory as such rooms ever offer. "You did not need to defend yourself so plainly," Cassion said, once we were beyond the chamber doors. "I would have spoken for you." "I know," I said, "but I have spent my whole life being spoken for and about and rarely spoken to. I find I would rather speak for myself, even badly, than be well defended in silence." He looked at me then with something that was not quite surprise and not quite pride, but a blend of both, warm enough that the mark at my wrist answered it with a small, private pulse of heat. "That," he said, "is precisely the woman I stopped walking for." The weeks that followed were not without their difficulties. Petra, true to the nature I had known my whole life, did not vanish quietly from the story. She requested an audience of her own within the fortnight, and I expected, walking into the small receiving room where she waited, that I would find her sharpened for another cut. Instead, I found her sitting very still, her hands folded in an unconscious echo of the way mine had always folded, and when she looked up at me, her face held none of the easy scorn from the hall. "I did not think you would agree to see me," she said. "I almost did not," I admitted. "But I decided I would rather know what you came to say than wonder about it." I have spent the last fortnight being reminded, by every relative who once nodded along with me, that they always thought you had more character than I gave you credit for, she said, with the particular bitterness of someone forced to watch their own words used against them. It is a difficult thing, to become the example people cite when they wish to describe cruelty. I did not ask anyone to cite you, I said. I have not spoken your name to a soul since that night. I know, she said, and something in her voice cracked slightly, unrehearsed. That is almost worse. If you had raged at me, I could have called you unreasonable and gone on believing what I always believed. But you simply let the silence do what I would not. I studied her for a long moment, my cousin, who had shared a nursery with me as small children before our fortunes diverged, who had learned early that cruelty upward and pity downward were the two safest currencies in a hall like ours, and had spent it freely because no one had ever taught her another way to be noticed. I do not require an apology to move forward, Petra, I said. I only ask that the next time you see someone standing at the edge of a hall in patched wool, you remember that you do not yet know what may be waiting to walk through the door. She did not answer that with words. She only nodded once, and something in her posture, not broken but softened, told me it had landed somewhere true. She did not become my friend after that, not quickly, not easily. But she stopped attending gatherings with her old sharpened tongue, and once, months later, I saw her quietly correct a younger cousin who had begun mocking a servant girl's mended dress, in a voice that sounded, for just a moment, like an echo of the correction she had never received in time for herself. Cashin courted me through that autumn the way he had promised, slowly, visibly, without a single evening hidden from the eyes of Stormville. He walked me through the market lanes and sat beside me at the harvest tables where the ordinary folk of the city ate, not merely the nobles. He learned the names of the chandler's children who lived below my rooms, and brought them sweets from the palace kitchens, not as a display for the crowds who inevitably gathered, but because, he told me once quietly, he had noticed I always smiled more freely around children who had not yet learned to measure a person's worth by their sleeves. I learned things about him, too, in those weeks, that he still kept a small wooden horse his father had carved for him as a boy on the shelf beside his bed, worn smooth from handling, that he did not sleep well the nights before difficult councils, and that he had never told anyone this until he told me, that the crown, which from a distance looked like the heaviest thing a man could carry, was in truth lighter to him than the loneliness he had carried for 6 years, believing no bond would ever answer his. I used to think the bond was a story the old wolves told to comfort themselves, he admitted to me one evening, as we walked the palace gardens beneath a moon just past full, the mark at my wrist glowing soft and constant now, a lantern I had grown to trust rather than fear. A pretty tale to make an arranged life feel like fate instead of duty. I did not expect it to feel like this, like being handed the one steady thing in a life that has otherwise never stopped moving. And what does it feel like, I asked, now that you know it is not merely a story? He considered this the way he considered all things that mattered to him, slowly, honestly, without reaching first for the answer that would please me. It feels like finally setting down something I did not know I was carrying, he said. Like a held breath, let out after 6 years of not noticing I had been holding it. I understood that feeling better than I could have told him in words, because I had spent 19 years holding my own breath in halls just like his, waiting for a door to open that I had long since stopped believing would open for me. There was an evening, not long after, when Cashin brought me not to the palace nor the market lanes, but to a small stone shrine at the edge of the eastern wood, where the old wolves of Stormville were said to have once gathered before the city walls existed at all. He told me his father had brought him there as a boy, and his father before him, and that he had not returned since the crown passed to him, because grief had made the path feel too long to walk alone. The shrine itself was modest, a ring of standing stones worn smooth by weather, and at its center a shallow basin of clear water fed by some hidden spring, said to hold, on certain nights, the reflection of a wolf that was not quite a wolf, more spirit than flesh, silver-eyed and patient, watching over bonds too old to be named by any council. I do not know if I believe the old stories, Cashin admitted, kneeling at the basin's edge, but my father believed them, and it seemed wrong to bring you into this life without showing you the place he most wanted to show me. We knelt together at the water's edge, and for a long moment I saw only our own reflections, tired and hopeful in the fading light. Then, so briefly I might have imagined it had Cashin's breath not caught at the very same instant, something moved beneath the surface. A shape like silver mist given the outline of a wolf, there and gone before I could be certain I had seen it at all. "Did you see that?" I whispered. "I did," he said, and his voice held none of a king's composure, only a boy's wonder, briefly returned to him. "My father told me the spirit only shows itself to those the bond has already chosen. I did not fully credit it until now." I thought of Petra's voice in the hall, calling me unmarriageable before 300 witnesses, and how far that judgment now felt from a spring-fed basin at the wood's edge, where something ancient and unhurried had troubled itself to look up at me. "It is strange," I said, "to be told for 19 years that I was worth nothing, and then to kneel at a spring and have something older than any hall's opinion look back at me as though I mattered." "You always mattered," Cashin said. "The hall was simply the last to notice. I do not think that reflects poorly on you. I think it reflects rather poorly on the hall." We stayed at the shrine until the light went fully from the sky, and walked home beneath a canopy of stars so thick and close it seemed almost within reach. And I understood, walking beside him in that particular hush, that whatever waited for us in Stormville's councils and gatherings, I had already been given something no scorn could touch, a place, however small and quiet, where I had been looked at and found simply enough. It was not only the council and Petra I had to weather that autumn. Word of the bond had traveled beyond Stormville's walls faster than any courier could have carried it, and within a month, a delegation arrived from the northern hold of Imberfell, led by a broad, unsmiling lord named Harwin, who had once been among the fathers hoping to see his own daughter seated where I now stood. He requested a private audience with Cashin, and though I was not summoned to it, I insisted on attending anyway, standing quietly near the window while the two men spoke, because I had decided, somewhere in the weeks since the Great Hall, that I would no longer wait outside rooms where my own life was being discussed. "Your Majesty knows my daughter Usselt was raised from girlhood to expect this match," Lord Harwin said, without preamble, his voice carrying the particular grievance of a man accustomed to having his patience rewarded. 2 kingdoms' worth of trade agreements were quietly built on that expectation. I do not say this to shame the girl standing by your window. I say it because someone must speak the plain cost of a king's sudden fancy. "It was not fancy," Cashin said, and though his tone stayed level, I heard the iron return to it, the same iron I had heard him use on the hall the night we met. "A fancy fades, Lord Harwin. This has not, and I do not expect it to. I am sorry for whatever hopes were built without my knowledge or consent, but I will not undo a bond to preserve an arrangement I never made." "Bonds can be resisted," Harwin said. "I have heard of alphas who set them aside for the good of their people." "I have heard of them too," Cashin said. "I have also heard what became of those kingdoms after, alphas who grew cold and joyless on thrones they no longer wanted, ruling well enough by habit but loving nothing, not even the people they claimed to have sacrificed for. I will not be remembered as one of them. And I do not believe, in your own honest heart, that you would wish such a king upon your grandchildren either." Lord Harwin turned to me then, measuring me the way the council had, though with less cruelty and more genuine searching. "And you, my lady, do you understand what you ask him to risk? Trade routes, alliances built over decades, a great many people who will suffer if those agreements fray." I had expected fear, standing under that gaze. I found instead a strange calm, the same calm that had carried me through 19 years of being measured and found wanting. "I did not ask him to risk anything, my lord," I said. "I did not ask him for a single thing at all. He crossed a hall on his own choosing, and I have told him plainly more than once that I would rather he walk away from me than break a kingdom to keep me. If the trade routes require a different king than the one who stopped for me, then perhaps they require a king willing to be unhappy for the length of his reign. I do not think that is a bargain I am able to make on your behalf, or his. I can only tell you what I have seen since that night. A man who governs no worse for being happy, and rather better, I think, for finally sleeping through the night." Harwin studied me for a long moment, and something in his hard face eased, not into warmth exactly, but into a grudging, weathered respect. "You do not plead your case the way I expected a poor Omega to plead it." "I have never been taught to plead," I said, "only to endure. I find I am done with enduring now that there is something worth simply living for instead." He left Stormville 3 days later without his daughter's match secured, but not, I think, entirely displeased. He sent, some weeks after, a short letter addressed to me directly, gruff and unadorned, wishing me well and admitting that Usselt herself had confessed relief at being spared a marriage she had never truly wanted either, having long favored a young captain in her father's own guard. Cassian read the letter over my shoulder and laughed, a full, unguarded laugh I had come to treasure more than any crown could be worth. "You disarmed a border lord with honesty," he said. "I have watched trained diplomats fail at that for years." "I did not disarm him," I said. "I only refused to pretend I wanted something I did not want, which is a smaller trick than diplomacy and a harder one." In the quieter days that followed, I began, almost without noticing, to feel useful in ways I had never been permitted to feel before. I spent mornings in the palace kitchens, not as an idle visitor but working alongside the cooks, because sitting uselessly in a fine chair while others labored had never sat easily with me. And the head cook, a broad woman named Adley who had run that kitchen for 20 years, took to me quickly once she understood I did not expect to be waited upon. "You've the hands of someone who has actually worked," Adley told me once, watching me knead bread dough with the same care my mother had taught me for mending cloth. "Half the ladies who come through here would faint at the flour." "I have very little practice fainting," I said. "Mostly I have practice working, and I find I would rather keep the practice than lose it simply because my circumstances have changed." Cassian found me there often, sleeves pushed up, flour dusting my forearms, and he never once suggested it was beneath the woman he intended to marry. Instead, he would lean in the doorway and watch, unhurried, until Adley shooed him off for distracting her kitchen, and he would go laughing, glancing back at me once before the door closed, as though memorizing the sight of me exactly as I was in that ordinary moment, rather than as the ornament a crown might have made of me. It was in that kitchen, in fact, that I first understood how thoroughly the bond had settled into something beyond the startling warmth of that first night in the hall. I no longer needed to see him to know he had entered a room. Some quiet certainty in my chest simply informed me, the way one knows without looking, that the sun has crossed behind a cloud. I asked him once if he felt the same, and he admitted he had known the exact moment I woke each morning since the night we met, though he had said nothing of it, not wishing to seem as though he were keeping too close a watch on a woman still learning to trust that watching was not the same as watching over her cage. "I would never wish to be your cage," he said, quiet and certain. "Only your shelter if you would have one. There is a difference, and I mean to keep it plain between us for as long as we live." "I know the difference now," I said. "I did not always. But you have shown me, plainly, morning after morning, and I find I trust the shelter more than I have ever trusted anything offered to me before." The formal announcement came at the first frost, in the same great hall where it had all begun, though this time the candles were doubled and the banners freshly cleaned, and every soul who had stood witness to Petra's cruelty stood witness now to something else entirely. I wore that evening, not silk gifted hastily to disguise my poverty, but my mother's own mendied gray, taken in and pressed and worn deliberately, because I wanted the hall to remember exactly where I had stood when Cassian crossed the floor toward me, and to understand that nothing about that girl had needed changing to be worthy of a crown. Cassian took my hand before the assembled hall, the same hand he had asked for rather than taken on that first night, and this time he did not merely hold it. He turned it palm up before the crowd, so that the mark at my wrist, no longer faint but fully bloomed to a steady warm gold, was visible to every lord and lady who had once looked past me without seeing anything worth their notice. "Some of you watched a woman be called unmarriageable in this very hall," he said, his voice carrying to the rafters without needing to rise. "I would like you to look now at what that word failed entirely to see." No one laughed that evening. No one whispered behind a raised hand. The hall that had once let a cruel word stand unanswered stood instead in a silence I recognized now as its own kind of apology, offered not in speech, but in the simple, humbled act of finally looking at me the way I had always deserved to be looked at. I did not need the hall's apology by then. I had already found, in the small steady warmth at my wrist, and the man beside me who had crossed an entire room rather than let one more unanswered cruelty stand, everything I had once believed I would spend my whole life going without. Later that night, after the hall had emptied and the candles burned low again exactly as they had the night we met, Cassian walked me not toward the palace's grand rooms but out to the same gardens where he had first told me what the bond felt like to him. And there, beneath the same moon, he knelt in the frost-touched grass and asked me plainly, without a single flourish borrowed from any coronation speech, whether I would consent to spend the rest of my life beside him. "I am not asking a Luna," he said. "I am asking Odessa, who mends her own sleeves and speaks plainly to councils and forgave a cousin who never once apologized. That is the only woman I want beside me. The crown is simply what comes with her, if she'll have it." I looked down at him, at the man who had once crossed a hall in front of 300 witnesses rather than let silence answer cruelty, and felt the mark at my wrist warm one final time, steady and sure, like a candle finally set in a window meant for it. "Ask me again tomorrow," I said, smiling, "and every morning after, if you like the answer as much as I suspect you will." "Every morning," he agreed, rising, "for as long as you'll let me." And so he did, not as a grand gesture repeated for show, but as a quiet, private habit between us, the way some men greet the day with coffee or prayer. Each morning, before the business of a kingdom claimed him, Cassian asked me some small version of the same question, and each morning I answered yes in some small new way, until the asking and the answering became simply the shape of our life together, ordinary and unremarkable and entirely mine.